Okay, this is going to be video 1 for the 9192 note set. So we're going to start off first by going over some vocabulary, and then we'll start taking a look at some of the examples. Okay, so very heavy in the vocab this section, okay? So quadratic function, this is something we should already kind of know. We know a quadratic means it has an exponent of 2, so if you look at all these examples here, notice they've all got exponents of 2. Quadratic, right? Exponent of 2 or a degree of 2. Function is just a kind of a fancy way of saying equation, right? A function that can be written in the form of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, okay? Which we've already been working on this guy. Now, as a side note here, they can have y equals. They can also have, instead of y equals, they will also have f of x. Sometimes you'll even see a 0 placed in there because they're asking you to solve something, okay? But for the most part, we're going to see either f of x or y equals. Okay, next vocab word is a parabola. The graph of a quadratic, oh, forgot a word there, quadratic function. Quadratic function there, okay? And it's going to be U-shaped, okay? And we'll take a look at a bunch of examples here in a little bit, but everything that we're going to be working on today is going to be U-shaped. Now, it will only open up or down for us for right now. We won't have anything that looks like a C where it's opening to the sides. They'll save that for Algebra 2. Okay, the next vocab word we have is called axis of symmetry. And it's where we take a line and divide the parabola in half. Now, you will often hear me refer to this as AOS. All right, so axis of symmetry, or AOS. Okay, now there is a formula to find this, and that's going to be covered in a different video. Okay, the next vocab word we're going to have to learn about today is vertex. So vertex is either the highest or lowest, they call it max and min in the book, but the highest or lowest coordinate point of a parabola, okay? And we'll talk a little bit more about what all that is, okay? All right, the next thing, and we will also talk about how to find that in a later video. Okay, the next thing, apparently that's where my function showed up. I don't know what happened there. Sorry, guys. All right, so the next one is roots of an equation or zeros of a function, okay? So you're going to hear people kind of talk about roots or zeros. They're not really interchangeable, but a lot of people pretend like they are, okay? So a root is simply a solution of a quadratic equation. So when you've been using the quadratic formula or you've been solving using factoring, those are roots, okay? A zero is just where it crosses the x-axis, right? X-intercept. Where does it cross the x-axis? That's what we're going to be asking ourselves, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of this vocab now, actually down in a picture. Okay, so on this first example here, they're going to ask you to find all of this information for this one picture here, okay? So axis of symmetry. Again, axis of symmetry is a line that cuts your parabola in half. So where could I draw a line to cut it in half? Remember, symmetrical just means equal on both sides or looks the same on both sides. Okay, so this right here is my axis of symmetry. Where do I cut it? Now, what's important to note here is that axis of symmetry is actually an equation of a line. It's a line. I know I've put a dotted line in here for you, but it is a line. So where's it crossing? It's crossing at -2, and what axis is it crossing? So this would be x equals -2. Okay, and that would be your axis of symmetry. So my answer here will be x equals -2. Okay, your vertex is either the highest or lowest point on your grid. So when we're looking at this picture here, where is your highest or lowest coordinate point? Well, that guy right there. Okay, and that guy right there is called the vertex. So this is the vertex. In fact, I'm up here. This is your AOS, axis of symmetry. And then there's your vertex. Now, when we're doing a vertex, we're actually looking for a coordinate point. So if I think about what is this coordinate point right here, it would be my x is -2 and my y is 1. So -2, 1. Okay, so down here, I'm going to get -2, 1. Now, side note here, something that's kind of important. Whatever you have here should always show up here. Your axis symmetry and your vertex are always related. Those x values will always be the same, okay? Now, we have to identify whether or not this is going to be a max or a min point. And so when we're asking about the max or min, we're still referring to the vertex here. So when I'm looking at this guy right here, is this a maximum point? In other words, is it your highest point? Or is it a minimum? Is it your lowest point? So in this case, this guy right here is the lowest part of the U, so it's going to be a minimum. All right. So I'm just going to put min down for minimum. All right, the next part to this is going back to vocab here, domain and range. So remember, domain is your X values and range is your Y values. Okay, so now when I'm looking here on this grid right here, X values, what X values are going to be graphed? Okay, so now a lot of you guys automatically think, you guys give me these random weird lines and you'll tell me something like, well, between here and here. And that's not quite right. Yes, I agree that you are graphing X values through here, but what about these guys here? There's also X values there, okay? Now, another important part to think about when we're talking about domain and range is, what do these arrows mean right here? Well, these arrows mean it goes on forever and ever and ever. And so one of the things that you have to understand is that on a parabola, not only does it keep shooting up, but it gets wider and wider and wider, and it goes out farther and farther and farther, okay? So on a parabola, it'll shoot either up or down, but it'll also get fatter and fatter and fatter the longer it goes, okay? So when I'm looking at my domain or I'm looking at my X values, what X values have been graphed? Well, eventually everything gets graphed because this parabola just keeps going on forever and ever and ever in both ways. So this one's kind of fun because it's going to be the same answer every time. Your domain is always going to be all reals. All numbers will get graphed at some point on that x-axis. Now, unfortunately, your y is not quite as easy here. So when I'm looking at my y values, I have a clear cutoff. I don't have any part of a graph down here. Okay, so there is a clear cutoff here when we look at your range, which is your y values. I cut right here. Okay, everything I'm graphing is from there up. Okay, so what is this number? Well, this number is 1. What axis is it crossing? It's crossing the y. Okay, so your domain, or sorry, your range here will be y greater than or equal. It'll always be equal. So if it's going up, it's greater. And then what was that low number we looked at again? We looked at 1, okay? Now, another side note here, just like your x's were the same, well, guess what? Your y's are the same. So your x's here should match up and your y values here should match up. All right, and the last thing we're gonna look at is solutions. Now, like I said, zeros, roots, solutions are kind of all interchangeable. You could call it x-intercept. They're all kind of talking about the same thing here. And so what we're looking for on this particular piece is, where does it cross the x-axis? Well, my parabola in this case doesn't touch that x-axis anywhere. It never crosses the x-axis. So in this particular case, your solution is no solution here. Get that. Sorry. It'll be no solution, okay? Because it does not touch the x-axis. Okay? All right, now let's go to the next one here and try this again. All right, so again, axis of symmetry. Where is your parabola being cut in half? Okay, well, it'd be being cut at half at 2. So x equals 2. Okay, your next part is your vertex. Again, that is your highest or lowest point. So right there, what is that coordinate point? Okay, now we already know that x value should be 2 because, again, these have to be the same. Okay, so 2 what? Well, it'd be 2, 4. Again, it's a coordinate point. What is this coordinate point? That coordinate point is 2, 4. Okay, so 2, 4. Now, is that a maximum point or a minimum point? So is that your highest or lowest? Well, in this case, that would be the highest, right? It goes all the way up and then starts falling back down. So this is going to be a maximum. Okay. Domain, what x values are going to get graphed? So if I'm looking here, remember that these parabolas keep going out and out and out forever and ever and ever and ever. And so eventually all x values will be graphed. So you're always going to put all reals. Okay. Now on my range is your y value. So I've got y. Now, since your parabola is going down, it's less than or equal. Okay, because it's going down. Okay. Now, what is your top cutoff here? Well, your top cutoff would be 4, or again, just look right there. Okay, so in this case, y is less than or equal to 4. Okay, so just make sure you understand this guy and this guy should always be the same, right? And then this guy and this guy should always be the same. All right, solutions. So now, where does it cross that x-axis? Okay, so if I'm looking here, I see, looks like it's crossing here at 0 and crossing here at 4. So on your solutions, you're going to just say that x equals 0 and x equals 4. Those are your two answers. Okay. Okay, let's go to the next one here, example 2. Okay, now on example 2, this one's a little different. It's actually asking us to write an equation. Write an equation. Okay, so when we write an equation, there's only two pieces of information we need, and that is where does it cross. So what are your x-intercepts or roots or solutions, whatever they want to call it, okay? So that's the first thing we're going to do. So we're going to have x equals 2 and x equals 4, okay? All right, so now, knowing that information, we still have to write an equation, okay? So what these are the answers. So like if you were factoring, these would be your final answers. So I have to think about, what factor would give me this answer, okay? So when we're looking at this, I'm going to kind of write it out and then we'll talk. It would be x minus 2 here, and it would be x minus 4 here. So when I'm saying what factors would have given me these answers, think about it. If I had x minus 2 equals 0, right? Because technically, if you're thinking about it, while we will say right now that this is equal to y because it's asking us to write an equation, everything up to this point had us putting 0 in here, okay? And so here would be, look, 0, and here's your factor, right? And you would tell me that x equaled 2. So we're just working backwards. I'm giving you the answer, and your job is to move this 2 over or subtract this 2 back over to see what the factors are, okay? Same thing here. So x equals 4, move that 4 back over and get x minus 4. Now, you then need to go ahead and FOIL this out, okay? So I'm going to get x squared minus 4x minus 2x plus 8. Or when I go ahead and combine like terms right here, I get x squared minus 6x plus 8. And that is the equation of your problem. Okay. All right, let's try the next one now. Now, one of the things we have not talked about yet is how do you know if it's opening up, down? That's got to have some sort of effect on your equation, and it does, okay? We're going to take a look at that after we talk about the roots and how do we get to here, okay? All right, so let's go ahead. First off, what are your solutions or what are your roots? They're crossing at -2 and 0. So we know that x equals -2 and x equals 0, okay? So now what would be my factor? Well, I'm going to move this 2 over, and so it will be x plus 2. Now on this guy, I can move the 0 over, but it doesn't really change it, does it? It's still just going to be an x. If you want to put a 0 there, you can. But those are your two factors, and you're going to set it equal to y. Okay, now we have to figure out this up and down stuff. How does that affect my equation? Okay, and so it's a really easy fix. If your parabola is going down, you are simply just going to put a -1 out front. And that tells us it's going down, okay? So when you distribute, so I'm going to go ahead and distribute that x through. I've got y equals -1 still up front. I haven't touched it yet. I've got x squared plus 2x. Okay, and then since it's going down, you're going to go ahead and distribute the negative through or change your signs. So I'm going to end up with y equals -1x squared minus 2x. And that is my equation for this parabola. And that concludes this note set.